He built her a throne in his mind and never asked if she wanted to be queen. You've felt it, haven't you? That first tremor of obsession. An architect, a man who built worlds from ink and paper, met a woman in a crowded gallery. She was chaos, all smudged charcoal on her cheek and a laugh like falling rain. He saw her not as she was, but as a space to be perfected. In his eyes, she was an unfinished cathedral. He began slowly with whispers. He told her she was a queen, and she began to hold her head a little higher. He told her she was a port in a storm, and she learned to quiet her own winds. He bought her dresses, the color of dusk and dawn, colors that fit the palette of the life he was designing. And soon, her vibrant, chaotic wardrobe faded into a symphony of his choosing. Her laughter softened, modulated to the acoustics of his quiet, minimalist apartment. She became his masterpiece, a living blueprint of his desire, and he adored her. He adored the way she moved through the spaces he designed, the way her silence complemented his thoughts. The core symbol of his devotion was a small, ornate silver key. He gave her a key to a house he hadn't yet built, a house he called their future. It was a promise forged in metal, a physical manifestation of the door in the sky he pointed to every night. He saw her as a reflection of his own genius, his perfect other half. But a mirror, even a perfect one, can crack. He never noticed the tiny fissures forming in her gaze. He never questioned why she agreed to every revision, every subtle erasure of her former self. He was too busy worshiping the icon he had created. One Tuesday, the air thick with the smell of rain and drying plaster, he came home to a silence that was different. It wasn't peaceful, it was hollow. The apartment was immaculate, a museum of his taste, and on the polished concrete table where his blueprints usually lay, there was only the small silver key. Next to it, a single sheet of paper, a photograph of a cracked antique hand mirror she once owned, a mirror he had replaced with a sleek, frameless one. On the back of the photograph, a note was written in her old, wild handwriting, the script of the woman he first met. It said, "You didn't love me. You loved the idea that you were a god powerful enough to create me. But the thing about a marionette is that you have to hold the strings, and you grew so arrogant, you forgot you were holding anything at all. I wasn't your cathedral. I was your trap. I became your perfect woman, so you would become utterly dependent on a fantasy. And now, I'm taking the fantasy with me. Try building a world with no sky." He was destroyed, not by her leaving, but by the chilling revelation that his act of creation was, in fact, an act of surrender. Her compliance wasn't submission, it was a strategy. She had allowed him to build his perfect world around her. Knowing that the architect is nothing without his blueprint, she hadn't just left him. She had demolished him, brick by imagined brick. In myth, it was the Pygmalion curse. In you, it's the habit you can't see. Imago projection. We don't fall in love with a person. We fall in love with a story we tell ourselves about them, and we punish them for any deviation from the script. He looked at the key, the door to a future that was now a void. He wasn't mourning a woman. He was mourning the god he almost was. She wore the mask to be seen, until the mask became her skin. She learned early that to be invisible is a kind of death, so she decided to become a spectacle, no matter the cost. Do you know that particular silence? The one that rushes in when you realize you are furniture in someone else's room? A young woman knew it well. She was a librarian, of forgotten histories, a creature of beige cardigans, and a voice so soft it was often mistaken for the wind. Men looked through her, women looked past her. Her existence was a footnote. One evening, in a dusty grimoire bound in human skin, she found it, a porcelain mask, impossibly thin, depicting a face of serene, haunting beauty. The moment she put it on, the world tilted on its axis. The mask did not cover her, it completed her. Walking home, the city, which had always ignored her, suddenly woke up. Men who would have walked through her now parted for her like a river for a stone. Women's eyes, sharp with envy and admiration, followed her every move. She had discovered the currency of the gaze. Each look she received was a coin, a proof of life she collected greedily. She left the library. The mask gave her a new voice, a new walk, a new name. It opened doors to rooms she had only read about. She became an artist, a muse, and a power broker, her life a performance for an ever-growing audience. Her ambition led her to an empty throne, a seat of power at the apex of the city's cultural elite, a position she secured not through talent, but through the sheer gravitational pull of her masked charisma. She sat on that throne, bathed in the light of 1,000 staring eyes, finally deafeningly visible. The man she chose was the city's most lauded architect, a man who built monuments of glass and steel. He worshipped her, but he worshipped the mask. He saw her as his ultimate acquisition, a living sculpture to adorn his life. One night, in their penthouse, overlooking the glittering city, he whispered what she had been waiting and dreading to hear. "I adore this mystery, but I want to see you, the real you." A tremor of her old forgotten fear ran through her. With trembling hands, she reached for the edge of the mask, but it wouldn't move. She pulled harder, her nails scraping against the smooth, unyielding porcelain. Panic set in. She clawed at her face, but the mask had fused to her flesh, become her skull, her skin. The architect watched, his adoration curdling into fascination, then horror, and finally, a cold, clinical pity. He saw not a woman in distress, but a beautiful object that had revealed a flaw. Without a word, he stood up and walked out of her life, leaving her alone in the silent glass tower. The throne felt very cold. She had instinctively used the mask to manipulate the world's desire, to build a fortress of attention around her fragile self. But the fortress had become a tomb. She had traded her face for a reflection, and in doing so, had become a ghost who could be seen by everyone but herself. The ancients called it a curse, a face stolen by a fae. Today, psychology names it persona identification, when the role you play to survive in the world consumes the person you are. You gain the world, but lose your soul. She stood before the vast window, the city lights reflecting off her flawless, permanent face. She had finally collected every eye in the city, and in exchange, she had given up her own. The cage he built for her safety became the sea she chose to drown in. He offered her a perfect, beautiful safety. He never understood that the most dangerous thing in the world is a cage without a lock. She was a woman born of storms. Her life had been a series of capsized boats and broken harbors. So when she met the lighthouse keeper, a man as steady and predictable as the tide, his love felt like dry land. He saw the terror in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden noises, and he made her a solemn promise. "I will keep you safe." He built for her a life of exquisite peace. Their home was the lighthouse, a tower of stone against the raging sea, and in the highest room, the lantern room. He hung for her a beautiful birdcage. It was not a prison, he explained, but a sanctuary, forged from polished brass, lined with velvet. It was a miniature fortress against the chaos of the world below. Every day, he would bring her delicacies, tell her stories of the shipwrecks and sorrows the sea had claimed, reinforcing the narrative that the world outside was a monster, and he was her only savior. And for a time, she believed him. The rhythmic pulse of the lighthouse beam, the solid stone beneath her feet, the gentle click of the cage door he locked each night. It was a lullaby of security. From her gilded perch, she watched the endless, violent beauty of the ocean. She saw gulls shriek and dive, tasting the salt and the wind. She saw the terrifying freedom of the waves that answered to no one. And slowly, the safety began to feel like suffocation. The steady pulse of the light began to sound like a ticking clock. The cage, her sanctuary, was suspended directly over the drowning sea, a constant reminder of the wildness she had traded for comfort. His love wasn't a shield, it was a weight. He saw her growing melancholy and misunderstood it completely. He thought her fear was returning, so he strengthened the cage, adding another lock, reinforcing the bars. "Now you are truly safe," he whispered, believing it to be the greatest gift he could offer. That night, the worst storm in a century descended upon the lighthouse. The wind screamed like a dying god, and the waves hammered against the stone. The keeper slept soundly, confident in his fortress. But the woman was awake. Using a small pin she had been sharpening for months, she worked at the new lock. His act of ultimate protection was her final motivation. She knew he wasn't protecting her from the storm. He was protecting himself from the part of her that was like the storm. Just before dawn, the lock gave way. She didn't look for a path to the sky. She didn't try to fly. She opened the door, stepped onto the ledge, and threw herself into the violent, churning blackness of the sea below. When the keeper awoke, the storm had passed. He went to the lantern room to greet his cherished love, only to find the birdcage swinging, empty, its door creaking in the morning breeze. He was destroyed, not by the loss of her, but by the utter madness of her choice. He could never understand that her instinct for survival was not for the survival of her body, but for the survival of her soul. In myth, it was a siren choosing the depths over the shore. In you, it's the battle between security and freedom. The instinct to escape learned helplessness. True safety isn't the absence of risk. It's the belief that you can survive the fall. He looked from the empty cage to the calm morning sea, a man who had lost a war he never knew he was fighting. He built her a haven to save her from the world. He never imagined she was the part of the world that needed saving from him. She was never the flame. She was the hand that kept him trapped as the jar. You know her. The one who feels like home right before she burns the house down. There was a poet who lived in a cabin in a forgotten wood, his heart a barren landscape of writer's block. The clock on his wall had no hands, for time had ceased to mean anything but the slow accumulation of dust on empty pages. His life was a long, gray silence. Then she appeared, and she arrived one night in a flurry of snow, seeking shelter, her eyes holding the dangerous spark of a forest fire. She stayed for 3 days. In those 3 days, he wrote 100 pages. Her presence was like a drug. She filled the silence, animated the world, made him feel like a god. And then, as suddenly as she arrived, she was gone. The silence that returned was heavier, darker. The clock with no hands seemed to mock him. He became an addict waiting for his fix. He lived his life for her return. And she did return. A month later, for a single night. 6 months later, for a week. Her appearances were entirely random, entirely on her terms. He became a moth, and she was his intermittent, cruel flame. On his desk, he kept a real moth, trapped in a glass jar, a tiny, frantic prisoner that mirrored his own soul, beating its wings against the invisible walls. Drawn to the candle he lit every night in vigil for her, his work became a scripture of his waiting, a testament to her ephemeral glory. His life shrank until it was only the four walls of the cabin and the infinite, agonizing space of her absence. He did not see that she wasn't a person. She was a pattern, an ancient, predatory instinct that knew how to create devotion through absence, how to manipulate desire by making its fulfillment a lottery. She fed on his adoration, on the power of being the sun to his desolate planet. Finally, after a year of silence, she came back. He was ready. He presented her with his finished book, a masterpiece born of his suffering, its dedication page bearing only her name. He believed it was the ultimate offering, proof of a love that could turn agony into art. She took the book and smiled, a distant, almost clinical expression. "It's a beautiful cage you've built for my memory," she said softly. She walked to his desk and looked at the moth in the jar, then at the candle. "You think you're the moth, don't you? Drawn to a light that will destroy you." She opened the lid of the jar. The moth, freed, flew instantly into the candle flame and vanished in a silent, violent puff of smoke and light. The poet stared, horrified. She leaned in close, her voice a whisper that extinguished the last of his hope. "You were never the moth," she said. "You were the jar. You were just the thing that kept it close to the flame." She left the book on the table and walked out into the night, leaving him in a silence so profound he could hear his own heart breaking. The ancients called it demonic possession. Today, psychology names it intermittent reinforcement. It is the cruelest mechanism of addiction, the unpredictable reward that turns a desire into a desperate, soul-destroying need. He sat in the dark, the smell of burnt wings hanging in the air. He finally understood. She didn't break his heart. She just reminded him he'd given it away for nothing. The ghost he mourned was never her. It was the boy inside he refused to face. Every man is haunted by the ghost of the woman he couldn't have. But what if she was never the ghost? An old man sat in a leather chair, the geography of his life etched into his face. He had built an empire, known success, but his inner world was a quiet, desolate museum dedicated to a single exhibit, the woman he had lost 50 years ago. Her departure was the wound around which his entire identity had formed. He saw her as the great tragedy that had both fueled his ambition and hollowed out his triumphs. He had spent a lifetime chasing her ghost, using her memory as the reason for his ruthlessness, his solitude, his inability to love again. He believed she had destroyed him in the most poetic way imaginable. Closing his eyes, he let the memories take him. He found himself standing at the edge of a chasm, shrouded in a thick gray fog. A single, unstable rope bridge stretched out before him, swaying in an unfelt wind. This was the landscape of his past. He knew he had to cross. As he took his first tentative step, whispers rose from the mist, the voices of his failures, his compromises, the echoes of every lie he'd ever told himself. Halfway across the bridge, a figure materialized out of the fog. It was her, young, beautiful, exactly as she lived in the prison of his memory. "I've missed you every day for 50 years, he breathed, his voice frail. She gave him a look of profound, heartbreaking pity. "No," she said, her voice the sound of falling leaves. "You have not missed me. You have used me. I was the perfect excuse, the beautiful reason you gave yourself to never have to look at the man walking behind you." Confused, he looked past her, and through her shimmering, translucent form, another figure emerged from the fog. It was himself, as a young man, ambitious, terrified, and cruel. The young man ignored the woman completely. His eyes, burning with a cold fire, were fixed on his older self. "You failed," the young man hissed. "You let this weakness poison everything. You spent your whole life mourning her when you should have been conquering the world." The old man stared, and in that moment, the architecture of his lifelong self-deception crumbled. The woman hadn't been the great love of his life. She had been a shield. Her ghost was the beautiful story he told himself to avoid the savage truth that he was running from the empty, terrified boy inside him. His relentless striving wasn't for her, but in flight from him. She didn't destroy him. His refusal to face his own shadow did. The will to life had given him a perfect obsession to ensure he never stopped moving, never stopped striving, never had to face the void within. In myth, it was Orpheus looking back at Eurydice. In you, it's the final necessary meeting with your shadow self. The people we cannot forget are often just messengers sent to tell us about the parts of ourselves we have abandoned. The woman and his younger self faded back into the fog, their purpose served. The bridge was steady now. At its end, he could see a simple, quiet shoreline. He walked the remaining steps alone, and for the first time, felt no ghost at his back. The most savage truth isn't that she destroyed him. It's that he was waiting for her to do it all along.